Welcome. So today we're going to continue reading the Renaissance story, and we're in the middle of the second chapter. So now the person is actually going to Florence. He started the journey through knowledge in the sunny square and reading. He opened the book of Dante, the Inferno, and just going to go straight into it here. After a few more days of reading the Inferno, I got on the train to Florence to once again wander in the streets of Dante and to visit his house in the center of the city. I had read more of the journey into the circles of hell, the sins and punishments, and all the moral philosophy that was put into these wanderings with the pilgrim. And I wanted to see the beauty of the streets in Florence too, and the churches and cathedrals with the big cupola from Brunelleschi in the center. As the train was approaching the station, I could already see the top of the cupola through the windows, rising over the rooftops of the city. There was always the feeling of entering into a history book when I was visiting Florence, like gliding into the station and walking out into the 1400s and the marvels of the Renaissance. There was a distinct feeling and almost elevating atmosphere of history, arts, a romantic era of enormous progress, and an explosion of creativity, beauty, science, and industriousness. Florence was the birthplace of modern Europe and the rebirth of the classical world with the Roman Empire and the Greek philosophy. It was a deep love and a magic place largely untouched by the centuries afterwards. The potential for studies was endless, and as the train stopped, I stepped out onto the platform and had a deep breath of air. A place of knowledge, refinement, civilization, and the foundation of our times. I started walking slowly, wanting to adjust to the people, the rhythms, and the atmosphere. And still being in the station, I bought a small coffee and had a little chat with the barista. So all of this is typical. If you go to Florence, you might experience some of the same, especially looking out the window. And if you read about the Renaissance and you've seen pictures from it, and then when you see the cupola, which it means just the dome of the main Santa Maria del Fiore in the center, it just transforms everything around you to just going into the history book. So it's an amazing feeling every time. And then also having a cup of coffee is kind of just getting the smell of an espresso and the feeling of it, and this little boost from the espresso is kind of part of the transition of getting into the right atmosphere. A little later, I was walking along the old buildings and felt how the senses were adjusting to the sophistication and refinement, and seeing the origins of architectural styles around every corner. I had to slow down to absorb the amount of artistic achievements everywhere around me, and that had inspired artists, writers, and sculptors for centuries. And as I reached the main square, I looked up towards the sun and closed my eyes carefully. There was no place like my beloved Florence. And after a few more moments, I could open my eyes again and was beginning to find the right mood for the visit I was about to experience at the Dante's house in between the smaller streets of the old town. I was excited and ready. When I had almost reached the house, I entered a little square and remembered from many years before from my last visit. I wondered if the same owner was still working there. A big man with black shining hair, a big smile, and a booming voice full of life and decades of adventures. I sat down at a corner table, picked up my book from my bag, and waited. And out of the door came the same old person, smiling and with deep, blistering eyes, approaching my table. "My friend," he said, "so long time ago." I smiled and felt flattered that he remembered me. "Same as last time?" I nodded and found a more comfortable position in my chair. "Yes, please." The sun was shining down into the little square, and there was a certain kind of happiness broadening within me. I opened the book, read a few more poems, and felt a connection to the ground underneath me, the very streets that Dante had walked in over 6 centuries before. The barista came out with the espresso and kindly asked, "What brings you to town this time, my friend?" I smiled. the coffee, and a visit to Dante's house. I'm reading the Inferno now. Ah, Dante. He looked out into the air. The complete poet, the father of our language. Then he walked inside again, humming on an old song. I suddenly remembered how the book I was reading was also the origin of the Italian language, put into its written form for the first time. Another invaluable contribution to the European culture and history. I once again felt small, thinking about the giants of history. With the espresso and sunshine and the old Renaissance buildings around me, I was slowly feeling fully ready to enter the house for the first time and see the displays and exhibitions of his works and parts of his personal life too. I packed my things and walked the last 2 blocks towards the entrance. Already there was a feeling of warped time, looking up at Little Bell Tower, an old window, and a flag banner from the old Florentine era. And then I went in, paid the ticket, and started the tour of the house. So this is also something like if you go to Florence, you have the Casa di Dante in the center, in the old town, between the small little streets, and around the corner is also this specific person who is working in Florence and is also an acquaintance, and he's a just fantastic person. So I wanted to put him in the story. Now more of the House of Dante. The house was full of interesting maps, models, and displays of coins and tools that were common in the late 1200s. When Florence was still a partly young and growing city, and before the real force of the Renaissance had started to attract the very best talents from around the country, and building up the full outburst of culture and release from the Middle Ages that had kept much of the continent in darkness. Dante was one of the first to start this process with his writings and the streams of thinking and emotions he had put into his work. And the love of life too. It was shining through from so many of the pages in his book. I walked up to the second floor and suddenly saw 3 big paintings of the 3 different worlds of the comedy and was stunned. The 3 worlds of the Inferno, the Purgatory, and the Paradise, as visual worlds full of details of the journey of the pilgrim, and all the structure of Greek philosophy and Christian tradition was put into it. I kept looking quietly for a long time to orient myself, especially for the rings of Inferno, with Lucifer at the bottom, eating the 3 traitors of Judas, Brutus, and Cassius, guilty of betrayal as the worst sinners. In front of me was the whole journey laid out on display, and once again the sophistication and clarity of the work struck me, and the depth of knowledge that was accumulated in the total of 100 poems. It was a life work and a gift to humanity, and an ambition that was astonishing. I kept looking and felt how a new framework for Dante was taking shape, and how I would come back to these paintings later as I started on the second and third book. I felt refreshed and happy, and very content that the trip had been so helpful already. The connection to Europe's foundation had already started to expand substantially into the deeper layers of both the history, philosophy, morals, and cultural underpinnings. It could be felt in my mind too. There was a certain firmness taking shape, or a different platform or deeper soil for the thoughts. The experience of thinking was elaborating in new ways that I needed some time to reflect upon. It was like connecting to something bigger that was also outside of my mind, something shared or in common with the previous times and the larger society as a whole. It was almost like the thinking started to come from a bigger home, and it felt relaxing, fuller of substance, and more detailed and interesting. Like several layers connecting in new ways. And the perception of the surroundings started to slightly be influenced too. But it was still early. So we're getting a little bit back to the effect on the person with this journey. I mean, he's reading and then he's also now visiting physically the city of Florence and the House of Dante. And this adds to the effects and the impact it has on him, on the person. And then he slightly starts to think about how it's starting to keeps changing the way he thinks and perceives and experiences and interprets the world. But it was still early, as you say. And the three paintings are there. They are factual paintings by Massimo Tosi. They are also on some of the other clips on this channel when I'm going through the three books of the comedy, so you can see them there. And they are very, very helpful to get an overview, and they're also beautiful. And then it's something just yeah, it's a great helper to have an orientation when you're reading it. So I visited the rest of the house, then went back and past the paintings, and then out into the streets again. I felt invigorated, and I spent a few more hours in Florence before returning to the station and waiting on the platform. When the train arrived, I entered and found a nice seat by the window and leaned back slowly. And when the train started to move, I quickly fell asleep. It had been a great day, and soon I would be back home again and continue my little journey through the world of Dante and through the old history of my own culture. I was getting to know myself better and much deeper. As I walked into my local square a few days later, I had a different view of the fountain, the church, and also the trees with the leaves standing next to the cafe. It was almost somewhat unfamiliar, or familiar, but with a perception that made them look new, or something to get to know in a new way, and to study with the eyes a bit closer. The sculptures had stronger contours, and the small movements of the leaves seemed lighter or more free. I sat down by my favorite table and felt the sun over my face again, a calm sensation through my whole body, and closed my eyes for a few moments to feel deeper. And when I opened my eyes, the waiter was standing next to the table with a smile and an espresso ready for me. I nodded, and he put it down on the table next to me. "Thank you," I said, and he nodded back and left. I found a book in my bag to finish the last pages of the Inferno, the first book in the trilogy. I needed more time to read all three of them in the coming months, but for now, I was looking forward to the last two poems of the Inferno. Through the innermost circle of hell, I would meet Lucifer and be reminded of the painting in the House of Florence, where he was eating three people for the deepest betrayal and the worst sin in the moral system of the book. And just as the deepest had been reached, the pilgrim and his guide starts climbing upwards again to the surface of the earth and out of the hell. And to my great joy, the last sentence uncovered a scene of great beauty as they came out upon the earth and finally could see again the stars above them. E quindi uscimmo a riveder le stelle. And thus we exited and to re-see the stars. This is truly the word astonishing ending of the Inferno. When they in the last canto, when they see Lucifer, they climb up on him, and then they start climbing on the back downwards, and then they see a little opening between the ice, like Lucifer is frozen in ice. So they find a little crack there, and they start climbing downwards, and then suddenly, well, he turns back and he's expecting to see up the back and the head, but then suddenly he sees the feet. And then it's because they've gone through the center, and then suddenly the world turns upside down. So then they keep climbing suddenly upwards again, and then they come out and then see the stars. That's how the first journey ends through the first book. So a little bit more the ending of this second chapter here. I felt solemn and grateful. A few weeks of readings and a little trip had already filled me with something new, something mature, and something of substance that I had not known before. It was almost like some deeper levels had started to grow or be aligned in the right place, like the brain or the mind was working with less friction or with a new and wider dynamic. And it was also like my surroundings felt more connected, both to the different elements, to each other, but also to history, to me, and to the culture I had grown up in and was deeply a part of, in ways I did not fully understand, but could feel. And I looked again at the last few words, to once again see the stars and the final visual moments of the book. It was a great gift to humanity and culture, I thought. Dante had given us something invaluable through his life, and it had lasted and spread for centuries afterwards, rebuilding a foundation for our society and the world we are living in. The stars. And I put down the book. I looked up to the sun and remained silent, only hearing the water from the fountain, some voices on the neighboring table, and some birds that were gliding over the skies. My home had just become bigger, and once again I felt grateful and happy. My life had changed already. So that is the ending of the second chapter, second part of the 3 parts in the short story. So now he has been through the Renaissance part, the whole rebirth part with Dante, and you have moments here where he reaches points where he starts to feel it's too early to have like a maturation of this, but it's just not everything is new constantly. Like he gets to a sense of being a bit familiar with some of this, and that changes the way he's thinking and seeing things. And also between the lines there is the joy of learning in itself, and that the process, like if you go on an adventure and you start finding like valuable things or like little treasures, it's very inspiring and motivating to keep going on the adventure. So partly this is kind of what is he is experiencing here when he's sitting in the square, and he's been on the trip and he's still just, the sun is still shining, symbolic for more enlightenment, more learning, more kind of vitality and life and joy and inspiration, and also the industriousness and so many of the things that you have also embedded in the whole Renaissance as a as an what should you call it, as a as a as a part of like history or culture just growing and going through this process, and then it's just like spreads in just light and beauty and inspiration. Yeah. So we're gonna stop here, and we're gonna continue with the last part a little bit later. So as always, hope some of this was interesting. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.